So our final selection, literary selection of the semester, is Sandra Cisneros' short story, Hollering Woman Creek. Or Woman Hollering Creek, I should say, and it's a real place. It's actually there. There's the road sign off the highway that tells you where it is. It's not. She's not making this up. Cisneros is one of the probably the most popular current serious literary writers in the United States today. She's very much sought after as a speaker and everything. She has been residing in San Antonio. I don't know if she still does or not, but she has. And of course, she ran into a little bit of a kerfuffle with her neighbors because she decided to paint her house. You can look it up online in San Antonio. Some very, very bright, vivid colors. And it's a rather historic neighborhood. Of course, the neighbors got upset about it, and you can't paint your house that color, blah, 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 blah. I guess they have no concept of private property rights, but whatever. She got into some legal jam with it or some sort of controversy. She was able to go back and show that the houses in that neighborhood actually, back when they were built, were colored quite brightly, and they were muted over time. They were more conservatively painted as the years go by, and the people actually living in those historic homes, frankly, didn't know anything about those homes and how they had originated and whatnot. It was originally a Tejano neighborhood, as many of the neighborhoods in San Antonio are, with long histories of Mexican-American families who had lived there for generations. But now you've got sort of gentrification going on and all of that. So she's a writer that's interested. She's really interested primarily in people. It's kind of unfair. I don't want to pigeonhole this writer and say she's interested in Mexican-American families and whatnot. She's interested in people. But like all of us, she writes about or knows her own family's experience better than anything else, and so she's going to be dealing with that a lot. And one of the things that runs through her work is the impact of place upon culture. Now, break that down for a second. How does place, a location, geography, a city, a countryside, a small town, how does it change or impact? I wouldn't say change. How does it impact culture? Because it does when you move or uproot, like Cleofila does in this particular short story. Things change. Your perspectives change. The people are different. How does it affect your culture? And of course, being from someone who is from an immigrant family, that's going to be central to that immigrant experience. Moving from one country to another is, as we've seen in other literary works, something that can be quite challenging and have a change. We talked about that in previous short stories, for example. But in this particular story, you have a young woman who has certain dreams and aspirations and gets married and crosses into the U.S. after the marriage. And what she finds is the values are really different, even though she thinks they're going to be the same. So she is Mexican. She's moving to the U.S., but she's going to be living in a city and in a neighborhood and functioning within a community that is Mexican-American. And she really thinks it's going to be sort of like my culture, only maybe a little bit more exciting and affluent, right? That there'll be more to do there than the tiny little town that she came from, that maybe they'll make a better living, she and her husband, maybe there'll be more excitement and more opportunity there. But what I think she doesn't realize is that that she is not just going to Mexico North, that San Antonio isn't Mexico. It's different. The people living there may speak Spanish. Their heritage and their ethnicity may be Mexican-American, most of them, but it ain't Mexico. It's a different place. And because it's a different place, it is a different culture. It's not an entirely different culture, but that's one of the things that she has to acclimate herself to in the short story. And this is something that you see very frequently in Cisneros' works, is characters who are trying to navigate the differences or shifts in culture when they go place to place or they have different circumstances. And it's kind of an interesting thing. In this case, Cleofila is not able to realize the dream and the aspiration that she had as a girl, that she would have this love of her life, as she says, that she would live in a romantic world with a husband who just dotes on her and feels passion, the right kind of passion for her. And a lot of what she gets from the soap operas on television and romance novels. And so, yeah, okay, you could say she was rather naive. Yeah, you could. But at the same time, it's all she knows. It's all she has aspired to. She grew up rather naive and sheltered. We get this sense very early on that she's the only woman of the house. She had 6 brothers that she claimed were kind of good for nothings, and her father, who I think was doting and loving, obviously. Mother's not there. And she grew up as the little princess of the household. And when it's time to get married, she has all these dreams, and she's projected onto this guy, Juan Pedro, who she says is, who she hopes anyway, is going to be her Prince Charming. He ends up not being, and in fact, he ends up being abusive. So that difference, that stark difference between home, right, on one side of the Rio Grande, and this new world, this new city on the other side of the Rio Grande, being part of Mexican life and culture in a Mexican hometown with Mexican people, and then moving to America and being part of a Mexican-American community, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. And she's discovering these differences. And one of the great differences is, of course, if you're in a relationship that's a bad one, she is cut off from her family, and that makes her very vulnerable. The friends that she has in the U.S. aren't like the ones back home. She's got some friends that she can, talk to, but they're not exactly the same types of relationships. She's not as close with them. She didn't grow up with them. And some of them are more businesslike. The Trini is more businesslike and really is not kind of cold. Another lady is someone who has lost her sons and brother, and she's so kind of wrapped up in the past that she's not able to make a connection. She has some other people that she gets to know, but it's not the same. You see, it's not the same. So she's pulled from childhood and early adolescence into adulthood, and that adulthood requires a change of place, a surprising to her change of culture, which she thought was going to be largely the same, only with more stuff. I don't know what she thought. Maybe she thought America was just Mexico with more stuff, and more opportunities and more things to do. But it was different than what she thought. And then a relationship that doesn't end up being what she envisioned. And she doesn't feel like she's part of the community as she was back in Mexico. So the problem is, if her marriage fails, she feels she is a failure based on the way she grew up, based on her community. If she goes back home with a child and one on the way and no husband, what will her hometown in Mexico think of her? I mean, you and I might say, well, who cares, right? Who cares? Well, that's a very American way of thinking about it. In other parts of the world, not just Mexico, but other parts of the world, that sense of small community is extremely important. Neighbors really, really know each other. They grew up together. They intermarried with one another. Their families are tied together. It's not uncommon in some parts of the world living in a very small town that if you're a child and you're misbehaving, some other, family's mom might discipline you and take you back home and say, well, I spanked him and brought him home because he was, stealing peaches in the orchard. And, there's a sort of sense of community responsibility for children there. And so it's very different here in the United States. Of course, they would sue you if you did anything to their child. Precious angels that we have here. So the very idea that people would take responsibility for other people's families, property, animals, anything like that is kind of like, hey, stay on your side of the fence. But in other parts of the world, there's a very integrated sense of community. And that's where Cleofila is from. She's from that kind of world. You go to a place like San Antonio. San Antonio, I think, if I recall correctly, is the 6th most populous city in America. There are a lot of people in San Antonio. It's a huge place. And it's very easy to feel out of place, even if you're in just a very confined neighborhood. She does not drive. She's not able to drive. And she has no independence. And when her husband hits her for the first time, it is shocking. It is shocking to her. This is not just something that would make you cry. She just fails to respond. She even says, I always thought if my husband ever hit me, I would never take that. I would fight back. I would get back up in his face, and she says, but I didn't. And I was kind of surprised myself that I didn't, because I was so stunned when it happened. I kind of didn't know what to do at the moment. We always think of ourselves, well, if I were in her position, I know what I'd do. I would do. Well, you don't know what you would do, honestly, because this woman, the young woman, is in a position where she gets hit, she's abused, and thinks she would have responded to a situation like that this way. But when it actually happens at the spur of the moment, she finds herself acting in a way that she didn't think she would. And then afterwards, he's all contrite. This is the way all these abusers are. They come back and cry and say, I'm sorry, I lost my temper, and I'll never do it again, and all this kind of stuff. And you made me do it because you made me lose my temper. And so shifting that blame. And so this very old ancient cycle of abuse where, the abuser makes the abused feel like she's the one that provoked me. I would never be this way if you wouldn't have it, and all this kind of thing. And I won't do it again. I'm really, really sorry. And then it just goes on and on and on. In this particular case, okay, she stays. Why does she stay? Well, we can examine that as kind of this part of the cycle of abuse that we see in real relationships, not just fictional ones all over the place. But she stays in part because it's hard to throw your dream away. And I don't mean throw it away in an irresponsible sense, but to say, I'm putting it away. I'm putting it, this is not what I envisioned. This is not what I signed on for. This is not the life I want. But it's really hard to shelve that. It's almost easier to say, I need to stick with this to make this work because I just don't want to give up on it. I want, kind of like a person who's running a business and it keeps losing money, and you say, why don't you just pack this all up? Well, it's your dream. It's how you envisioned yourself. And it's very hard to come to terms with the fact that dream is not going to pan out the way you thought it was. You're not just giving up on the relationship. You're giving up in a way on everything you've invested in that dream. And it's really also, secondly, it's hard to face the judgment of other people. When she comes back home with a child and another one on the way and no husband, what is the village going to say? They're going to talk and say, well, maybe she wasn't a very good mom. Maybe she wasn't a good wife. Why would she leave him? Why would he have to beat her up all the time? Was she being disobedient to him? And all these kinds of things. And she will be seen as a failure. And it's very different, maybe even by her own family. Now, the only thing she's got going for her is what her father said to her early on. Her father said, look, the love of a parent for a child is the strongest thing in the world. It's the strongest thing in the world. Love between spouses sometimes grows cold, but that love for your child never grows cold. That is the very thin thread that convinces her, I can go back home and my dad will take me in. I know that. That at least I do know. Everything else in my life can be going wrong, but that I do know will be the case. And she does. She gets on Greyhound bus and goes back to Mexico. And that's the last we see of this. Now, this is part of a larger collection of short stories. There's a cover, and they deal with some of the same characters throughout several stories. It's kind of like William Faulkner does with his Yoknapatawpha County. It's the same characters kind of come up, same places come up, story after story after story. Same with Kate Chopin. Remember that with the Storm? It was part of a set of stories, and so she's following kind of in that kind of tradition. But one of the things I want you to think about, and I'll ask you to kind of explore this with the discussion section, is why is the creek and its name significant? Woman Hollering Creek. And of course, the lady who brings her to the Greyhound station hollers as she goes across the creek, which really freaks Cleophilia. I keep saying Cleophilia, it's Cleophila. It kind of freaks her out. And it's like, what do you yell for? Well, it's the creek. I always holler every time I go across it. What is the significance of that creek and its name? What does it signify? And oh, by the way, what does she not, I'm getting into this a little bit. What does she not do the first time when Pedro hits her? She doesn't holler, does she? So what's the significance of the creek? Woman Hollering Creek. What is it? And the discussion section is going to ask you as one of your options to explore the question of creeks and rivers and boundaries and those kinds of things. All right. So let's talk about the quiz real quick for this week. 2 questions and a bonus question. Pick up all the bonus points you can. This is our last quiz. 1, what did Benjamin Banneker help survey? What city did Benjamin Banneker help survey and design? And 2, how does Cleofila make it back to Mexico? How does she get there? Be precise. There should be a parentheses closed there, but it's an underline anyway. Be precise. How does she get there? What specific means does she take to get there? Bonus, what letter were Haitians unable to pronounce in Spanish? What was the letter that Trujillo was certain they wouldn't be able to pronounce when he held up a sprig of parsley, say what this is? And what's that letter? Now, here's what I want to do in wrapping everything up this week. Please be sure to have your quizzes submitted and discussion posts completed by Thursday at midnight. This is very important. Grading is due a certain time. I can't take things late. All final grading of discussions and quizzes will take place on Friday. Okay, on Friday. I won't be able to take late material this week. Can't do it. Final exams must be submitted by Friday at midnight. Need it by midnight. 12:01 is too late. I got to get them graded. They want the grades in at a particular time. I will post as best I can using Canvas. Their grade book is really goofy. Your final quiz grade, what your quiz average was, your discussion grade, your reader response grades, and then your final exam grade. I will not have an opportunity to give you written feedback on the final exam. You'll only get the grade on that, but I do plan to give you written feedback on reader response number 2. That's probably going to take Thursday, possibly the rest of the day on Friday, depending on how fast I can read them. Okay, so be sure you finish strong, and I've enjoyed having the class with you. I hope when all this mess is over and you're back up on the campus, you have a chance to drop by and say hello. I know some of you I've met you before, and but some of you I've never met in person. I would look forward to doing that and chatting with you and helping you in any way I can with the rest of your degree plan. If it involves more literature classes, great. If it involves anything else, I'd be happy to help you. Okay, so thank you for taking the class. I hope you learned something and enjoyed it, and let's all finish strong.